It was always going to come to this. The very same Republicans who swallowed their principles, removed their spines, silenced their deep concerns about Donald Trump's lack of principles or stability or sanity, are the very same ones today sounding the loudest alarms about Donald Trump's foreign policy. Prominent Republicans now openly and publicly wondering if the leader of their party, their movement, and the country appears to be on the verge of making a deal with Iran that leaves the United States of America worse off than before the war with Iran began, as Donald Trump now finds himself stuck between relaunching a deeply unpopular war that is causing deep economic anxiety and pain for every American and eroding his political coalition and the standing of his party, or, curtain number two, accepting a deal with Iran that has the potential to leave the current Iranian regime strengthened and in a stronger position with more leverage than they were in and than they had at the start of the war. Republican Senator Roger Wicker, who notably is the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, wrote this, quote, "The rumored 60-day ceasefire with the belief that Iran will ever engage in good faith would be a disaster. Everything accomplished by Operation Epic Fury would be for naught!" Exclamation point from Mr. Wicker. Texas Republican Ted Cruz had this to say, quote, "I am deeply concerned about what we are hearing about an Iran deal," in quotes, being pushed by some voices in the administration. That the result of all that is to be an Iranian regime still run by Islamists who chant death to America, now receiving billions of dollars, being able to enrich uranium and develop nuclear weapons, and having effective control over the Strait of Hormuz, then that outcome would be a dangerous mistake, end quote, from Ted Cruz. Even Lindsey Man-It-Was-Fun Graham is saying the quiet part out loud these days. Quote, "It makes one wonder why the war started to begin with, if these perceptions are accurate," end quote. Now, time will tell if Lindsey Graham or Ted Cruz or Roger Wicker, for that matter, these ride-or-die allies of the president's, who have today become voices of dissent over the framework or outlines of a deal with Iran, will fall into line as they have every single time over the last decade. But in the same way the broken clock is right twice a day, Lindsey Graham is getting to a fundamental truth and unanswered question about the war with Iran. It has never been clear to the vast majority of the American people why the war was started to begin with, or what the objectives were, or when we would know we'd succeeded. In the early days of the war, Donald Trump had called for regime change very publicly, saying help is on the way. But Iran's brutal dictator has been replaced with that brutal dictator's son. Then it was said that the point of the war with Iran, this was something Marco Rubio said publicly, was to eliminate Iran's missile program and nuclear program and degrade their military. But we know that U.S. intelligence believes that Iran has retained significant military capabilities and that the nuclear program has hardly been damaged. Now, as Tom Nichols writes in The Atlantic, quote, "Now the president will end up having to sign off on a set of terms that will likely make the JCPOA, the Iran deal signed by the Obama administration, look demanding by comparison." And the U.S. proposals, the New York Times reports, quote, "focuses on ending Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, something that was not an issue before the war started. In any case, Donald Trump may not get the chance to sign off on any deal as the ceasefire is looking very shaky at the moment. U.S. forces launching strikes overnight, what CENTCOM said were, quote, self-defense strikes on missile sites and Iranian boats that were planting mines. Iran's regime is threatening to retaliate against these new strikes. Donald Trump lurching toward a potential endgame with the war in Iran is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Deputy Secretary of State, former Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman is here. She led the U.S. negotiating team that reached an agreement on the Iran nuclear deal in 2015. Also joining us, the aforementioned staff writer at The Atlantic, Tom Nichols, is here. He's a professor emeritus of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College. Ben Rhodes will join us in a moment. Ambassador Sherman, let me start with you and your thoughts on these very notable as I call them, ride or die allies of Donald Trump, sounding very public alarms about what's been reported about a possible deal.
I feel like it's a little bit of deja vu, because when we were doing the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known as the Iran nuclear deal, these were the voices that were saying it is a bad deal. It doesn't take care of everything. It doesn't stop everything forever. Indeed, it was a deal that was quite sustainable for a long time and certainly could have been extended through swift and good negotiations. That said, we're in a very different place now, as you pointed out. Before the president started this war of choice, this ill choice, the Strait of Hormuz was open. There was freedom of navigation. And now he has to spend all of his time figuring out how to open the Strait of Hormuz, end our blockade, get gas prices down, which will take at least 2 or 3 months to be achieved once this is accomplished, all the while not really having started negotiating on the nuclear issues,
right.
Figuring out how to verify or monitor any of it, including the end of the Strait of Hormuz. So lots of details and very little substance so far.
I mean, let me just ask, I mean, it seems like an undeniable conclusion to say that we are worse off, we are in a worse position in terms of leverage and accomplishments now than before the war started. What, I mean, I want to say what were they thinking, but I don't, I mean, if you have, what were they thinking, Ambassador?
I have no idea. I've stopped trying to understand how the president thinks, other than sometimes being quite impulsive. Look, we always knew, and every administration, Democrat and Republican, had gamed out the use of the Strait of Hormuz as leverage. This was nothing new. We had all gamed out that, in fact, it could start an Arab-Persian war, that Iran could attack our allies and partners in the Gulf. This is nothing new. But in fact, President Trump moved forward, and all of those things happened. So the points of leverage are now quite clear that Iran has. And even if the Strait of Hormuz can be opened, if the blockade ends, if gas prices stabilize over the months ahead, we will be nowhere where we need to be. And we will all understand that at any point, Iran can do this again.
Let me give you a chance to respond to Mike Pompeo, who I think is insulting Trump by insulting you, but I don't think it's quite, I don't think it lands as the flex Mike Pompeo thinks it is, especially once the White House spokesperson, Stephen Chung, gets the F-bombs involved. But let me read you Mike Pompeo's statement and let you respond. Quote, the deal being floated with Iran seems straight out of the Wendy Sherman, Robert Malley, Ben Rhodes playbook. Pay the IRGC to build a WMD program and terrorize the world. Not remotely America first. It's straightforward. Open the damn strait, deny Iran access to money, take out enough Iranian capability so it cannot threaten our allies in the region. Overdue, let's go. I think what he means to do is to threaten Donald Trump's, virility with a comparison, an unfavorable one to you. But what he reveals to the world is that Trump has been completely bamboozled by the people around him who have led him down a path that pales in comparison to the deal you negotiated.
I think Lindsey Graham, in the quote that you showed, said it exactly right. It makes you wonder why we went down this road to begin with, because we are in a place that is much tougher. Look, negotiating with Iran is very difficult. They are tough guys. All guys, and they are the largest state sponsor of terrorism. They aren't. This isn't a regime any of us want, and the president started all this by saying he'd have the backs of the Iranian people. That's gone by the wayside. The president, ostensibly of Iran, started to restore the internet today to give people access, but they've been using VPNs to figure out what's going on in the world. But the lives for Iranian people are worse, not better, than when this all started.
Let me just For close viewers, I'll share what Stephen Chung, the White House spokesperson, had to say in response to Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo has no idea what the F he's talking about. He should shut his stupid mouth and leave the real work to the professionals. He's not related to anything that's happening, so how would he know? With friends like that, I'm not sure who needs enemies, Tom Nichols.
Yeah, that's some top-notch communicating from the communications director right there.
I'm like 10 years retired, and I could have done better than that.
Guy's really on top of his game. And as I said and what I wrote, this was a little glimpse into what I think is kind of sweaty panic inside the White House. That this is all going south on us. Our own allies, our own most sycophantic supporters. I mean, when you're getting scored on by Lindsey Graham, that's got to sting. But there are two. I'll take a whack at the thing you asked Ambassador Sherman. What were they thinking? I think two things are clear. One is that Donald Trump thought this would be a war that would bring him glory. I think that's what he was thinking. I shall be the liberator of Iran. And I think the second thing they were thinking is this regime will collapse. And I think everything we've been going through for the past 2 months, all of these operational successes that aren't amounting to a strategic effect are all because once the regime didn't collapse, you weren't going to get all the other stuff you wanted.
Right.
Had the regime collapsed overnight and a more compliant regime had come into power, you'd say, okay, now we're going to talk about terrorism. Now we're going to talk about the Strait. Now we're going to talk about nuclear stuff. But once that didn't happen, they didn't know what to do. And they still don't know what to do. And I think what you're seeing now is the kind of, again, this kind of panicky, sweaty search for a face-saving exit. I think that's put, it's forcing CENTCOM into saying things like, well, these were self-defense strikes. These are obviously meant to be demonstrative. They're meant to show that we can still hit Iran. But to what end? What is it they think they're going to get out of this now that the regime is obviously going to stay? The Iranian people have been abandoned and now, are, as the ambassador just said, worse off than they were. The notional idea that the Iranians could choke off the Strait of Hormuz is now a reality. And we've spent billions of dollars and a lot of our weapon stocks. And for what?
The strain that Trump is putting on his own party with what Republican senators call selfishness. The sound you hear is, of course, Election Day in America. We'll keep following these primaries, and voters in Texas are coming out in the Republican primary. And they are looking down the barrel of what some view as a MAGA civil war, where Donald Trump has picked the anti-Republican reelection side. That's what Senate Republicans even are saying. So kind of an unusual headline if you think about it that way. This is the runoff you might have heard about if you follow the news. You have an embattled incumbent Republican, John Cornyn, and the very controversial, once impeached, scandal-plagued Ken Paxton, who netted a Trump endorsement. And that's got Republican senators and strategists mad. They say it makes it less likely that they'll hold the Senate. Some have called this a brutal primary that leaves Republicans in tatters. Of course, it all depends on whether the eventual nominee can win. But it paves the way for a rising star in the Democratic Party to have what, again, even Republicans say is potentially a better shot at turning this seat blue. Now, if you're watching the news going, I feel like I've heard about this before, it is true. We have heard many times about efforts to turn Texas blue that have not actually won, or as the kids would say, manifested. But why is this time different? Well, Paxton has more than your usual amount of MAGA baggage. He had to settle a federal corruption indictment. He was impeached for alleged fraud and obstruction of justice. His wife filed for divorce amid these allegations, and those are allegations. Of course, a divorce proceeding can go on in court, but it is a matter of public record for voters to be aware of that there are allegations of multiple affairs. I will note that he was acquitted in his impeachment, and he has asserted that he is innocent of all corruption charges. But this is politics, not a court of law. The Republican senators were basically unanimous at wanting the non-impeached, non-scandal-plagued incumbent Republican to be their choice. The candidacy has divided many, including even some couples in Texas.
It's not a great choice, either one, really, but I think I lean towards Paxton, for sure. He's local. Cornyn hasn't always been with the Republicans the way I would like, but it was a tough choice. But I did vote for Paxton on the runoff.
What are your thoughts about Paxton?
Crook. Yeah, that's it, period. He's just a crook.
That's an independent talking.
When the economy is taken into account in the summer, people plan their trips, they think about gas prices, they think about what they can afford, and it's less under Trump. Here was a White House official, though, today.
The thing that I've seen when I look at credit card data and other things that I can get for the private sector is that while people have been spending more money at gas stations, they've been spending more money on everything else, which means that they're still very, very optimistic about the state of the economy.
You can ask yourself whether transferring your planning and your budgeting to your credit card reflects, quote, optimism or just the crunch of the fact that things are more expensive and people go into credit spending to say, all right, well, we'll do the July 4th trip on the card and we'll figure the rest out later. It's more of reality than optimism, and it's a rising price problem that Trump promised and has now failed to fix. 59%, meanwhile, say Trump lacks mental sharpness. Many people skeptical of his health problems. He says he got a clean bill of health after a third in-person doctor visit in just over the year. Skeptics, though, have been raising questions about everything from the appearance of his hands to recent events where he has his eyes closed in meetings, whether you call that a nap or something else, is the eye or the closed eye of the beholder. I want to bring in from the New York Times, Molly Jong-Fast and Michelle Goldberg from the New York Times, also both analysts for us at MS Now. Michelle, we start with Texas, where I want to be objective. If Paxton gets the nomination with Trump's help and ultimately holds the seat, then it may have cost them a little more, but it will feel like noise. If they blow a seat, though, in a red state because Trump just didn't care about holding the Senate, that would really be something.
Yeah, I mean, it would be astonishing. This has been the white whale for Democrats for as long as I've been covering politics, the idea of a Democratic senator from Texas. And I think most people who follow Texas think that Tallarico has a better chance against Paxton because he is so plagued by, scandal, both in terms of kind of bribery and corruption, but also just in terms of this very ugly and messy divorce. At the same time, the amount of the way that these Republican senators are showing so much kind of angst and sense of betrayal over Donald Trump stabbing John Cornyn in the back, it's like, this is the line for you? Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, that's what's astonishing, is that you see them all say, well, now we're going to stand against the ballroom, right? Now we're going to stand against the slush fund. Now we're going to vote for a war powers resolution because how dare you take out our friend potentially to help take out our friend John Cornyn. And I think it just goes to show how utterly insular they are, right? That this is the line that Trump can cross that will finally make them say, this man is out of control.
Yeah, I mean, your criticism makes a deep point. If you remember in The Dark Knight, where the Joker says, and this is his cynical view, he says people are only as good as they're allowed to be. Mm. And whatever the cowardice or narrowness, or you called it insularity, of these Republican senators, apparently they are only as independent as they think they're allowed to be. And having watched a move that in the narrow math of the Senate, they perceive, let's put aside whether it happens, as I said, we don't know. They perceive it as materially making it more likely they lose the Senate. Mm-hmm. And that, as you say, unloads them to say, well, maybe we will stand up against your ballroom.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and what's so bizarre, too, is that it's actually only by kind of standing up against Trump in these very small ways that they might have a chance, I think, or have a better chance of holding the Senate.
About this and doing some research, a nurse in Queens who makes $75,000 a year pays more than $12,000 a year in taxes. Does that really make sense? If people want me to pay more billions, right, then let's have that debate. But don't pretend, that's going to solve the problem. You could double the taxes I pay, and it's not going to help that teacher in Queens. I promise you.
Putting aside his defense of his tax record, which is sort of what he's answering the question on, he advocates eliminating the entire federal tax burden of those lower income people. And so my question to you on the politics is, why do you think he views that as popular right now. I mean, that would have been lefty radical 10 years ago.
Well, I'm not sure if he does really advocate for it. I mean, he throws it out in an interview as a way to deflect from the question of whether his own taxes should be raised, right? But if you support the Republican Party, as Jeff Bezos does, you are kind of de facto not supporting lowering taxes.
Agreed. That's what I'm saying. He's with the president, so we know where he is on policy, but there's something that he thinks is popular.
Well, I think that a lot of these, especially in the technology industry, right, they know that artificial intelligence, or at least they suspect that artificial intelligence is going to be terrible for a lot of people's jobs. And they know that there's going to be, sort of metaphorical pitchfork wielding mobs coming for them, right? They're already fantastically unpopular. And so you see them kind of paying lip service to things like, yes, eliminating their tax burden, a universal basic income. They throw all these ideas around, but they never actually then kind of support redistribution when it actually counts.
On night one of the Colbert Report back in the day, I said, anyone can read the news to you. I promise to feel the news at you. And I don't know about you, but I sure have felt it.
Stephen, I'm here on behalf of Paramount. They wanted me to read this statement. Paramount strongly believes in covering both sides of any black hole that is swallowing everything we know and love.
That's what we thought America was, just the land of the free, the greatest democracy. That was what it was.
Yep. That was it. Yeah.
Still is, hopefully.
Thoughts?
I mean, that's what it was. I think that, look, there's no question that this show was taken off the air for political reasons. And I think even in Trump 1, it would have been unthinkable that these kind of TV networks and that these media oligarchs would be, kind of listening to Donald Trump about programming decisions, both because I think maybe they thought that Donald Trump was a transient phenomenon and they would be ashamed to have done that. And now we've seen this mass capitulation, not by the American people, but by these, kind of ostensible elites. It is so shameful. And it's so short-sighted. Unless they really think that they are just going to, that there's going to be some sort of authoritarian consolidation and they're never going to have to answer to an opposition party. If there ever are Democrats back in power, I hope that there will be a lot of hearings about the sort of decisions that these various owners have made to kind of curry favor with this administration.
And Molly?
Sherry Redstone.
You say goodbye.
And I say Sherry Redstone agreed to cancel Colbert so that she could get regulatory approval. It was pretty craven. And, she set a date so she could sell Paramount to the Ellisons and was able to do it. It was pretty transparent, very craven. And also, it's worth realizing that people who watch these shows don't like it, right? We've seen the CBS takeover. Bari Weiss has gone to CBS. She has made some decisions, editorial decisions, and their numbers just, their evening news numbers just keep going down. So we really do see that viewers don't like these kind of ideological decisions being made at news channels that never used to be like that.
And you think they see Colbert end, and then where do they go?
I think they follow Colbert. We'll see what Colbert does next. But what's replacing Colbert is not something similar. It's a comedy hour.
You were at that detention facility in Newark yesterday, Delaney, where there were protesters, there were members of the press, and there were a number of Democratic office holders and Lillian Mejia, who we spoke to yesterday. That's footage of you having water poured in your eyes after pepper spray was fired. Can you just take us through what exactly happened?
I came out of the detention center and immediately saw that there was a very precarious and tense standoff, where you had a line of armed ICE agents, an armored vehicle. You had a line of protesters there. And I was trying to do my best to de-escalate this. I put myself between the ICE agents and the protesters. At some point, ICE officials said they're just going to push this convoy of vehicles through the crowd. And I told them, you cannot just plow your way through a crowd of civilians. I tried to stop it, tried to find an arrangement, but they continued on. So I put myself again between the agents and the crowd. And that's when they started shooting pepper balls at our feet, as well as, right past me, seeing the pepper spray. I did my best to try to keep people safe, to try to de-escalate and keep the crowd and the agents separate. But, myself and a number of others certainly got, irritation in our eyes. My throat was burning. It was something that was really painful to watch. I mean, Chris, I'll tell you, I have to say that the ease with which it seems like violence is emerging in our streets in America, we cannot normalize this. Violence in America, it should not be easy. It should not be inevitable. And this is something that I'm worried is going to continue on in the coming days. I can't say for certain that we're past the worst of it. But this is directly related to that reconciliation bill. And I hope the American people see it next week when we're voting on in the Senate. We cannot give ICE billions of dollars more with no accountability when American families are getting nothing here and nothing to help them with their affordability crisis.
Senator Andy Kim in New Jersey, who was in that detention center yesterday in between protesters and those agents outside that DHS detention facility. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Today, activists are holding a third day of protests at the site of the president's proposed 250-foot-tall triumphal arch. The administration is fighting lawsuits filed by Vietnam vets and others who have sued to stop construction near the entrance of Arlington National Cemetery.
We shouldn't have no arch. That is not an honor to the veterans. That is just, an ego trip to this president. And it's on our taxpayer money. And it shouldn't be paid. We need that money more for veterans benefits. We need it for housing, for health care.
Nothing hurts me more for the military to think that one person's more important than all the people that have died for this country.
Joining me now is Democratic Congressman from California, Jared Huffman. He's the top Democrat on the House Natural Resources Committee, which oversees the National Park Service. He has gone to the site where the arch is being constructed. So, Congressman, in an op-ed, Republican Senator Jim Banks argued that public beauty is a gift and the arch's design revives the classical architecture of the Capitol, the Washington Monument, and the Jefferson Memorial. Is beauty in the eyes of the beholder when it comes to the triumphal arch?
Well, it certainly is. And the one thing that shouldn't be in the eyes of the beholder is the law. We have a bipartisan law passed in the 1980s, the Commemorative Works Act, that lays out a thoughtful process, how to do it right when you're changing the United States Capitol. Donald Trump has flouted that law and, just seems to think that he's the king and he can build these tributes to himself all over Washington, D.C.
Well, I think but the Trump administration claims they don't actually need Congress's approval for the arch because they're just building on the plans for another project that was approved over 100 years ago, but just was never built. And it's on that exact same spot. So what, if anything, can you and your committee actually do about it? Because as we saw firsthand, you saw it, and there's a picture of you when our cameras went with you. The work's already started.
It has. They didn't want us to see. That's why we had to look behind the curtain there, Chris. But they were breaking ground, something that certainly was belied just the day before by the Secretary of Interior, who testified in our committee that there was not even a project, that there was just a discussion. But you mentioned this century-old authorization roughly in the same place. That was for a totally different design plan. It had nothing to do with an arch. And so if the president tries to justify, rushing ahead like he did with the East Wing demolition on the basis of that century-old design plan for something totally different, that's a specious argument. And I don't think that Judge Chutkan and the federal courts will think kindly about it.
And of course, it's not just the arch. There is that giant hole in the ground where the East Wing of the White House once stood. Redoing the reflecting pool is taking longer than expected, costing more than expected. And now we have this. New images of construction on the South Lawn for a UFC cage match that's supposed to celebrate America's 250th anniversary. All of this going on, I should point out, for the start of the summer tourism season. What do you make of this, Washington?
This is just Donald Trump trying to remake our nation's capital and our culture and, our daily lives in his image. And this is just not America. We don't have a king. We have a very diverse country. Not everybody loves UFC fights and wants to celebrate them at the White House. Not everybody wants these military parades on Donald Trump's birthday. They don't want Donald Trump's name on buildings all over town. And they don't want this gaudy Arc de Trump obscuring the view of Arlington Cemetery. So all of these things, any one of them in isolation might seem fairly trivial, but the bigger picture is we've got a president who is off the rails, who thinks that the rules and the laws about our nation's capital and commemorative works just don't apply to him.
When you talk to members of your committee and the folks who oversee the Park Service, do Republicans express real concerns to you?
They roll their eyes. But they won't find the courage to stand up to President Trump. I'm so impressed that finally the dam broke in the United States Senate over this slush fund, and they did finally stand up to the president. I hope that we see more of that.
And before we go, I want to talk to you about redistricting, because your district in California, I think it's fair to say, was significantly redrawn ahead of the midterms. You're still in a solidly Democratic district. But do you have some larger overarching worries about redistricting around the country? Some of those obviously still being fought in court. And the fact that some people are predicting this is just going to cause chaos in the midterms.
Well, the chaos has already begun. I am very worried, Chris. I think we're in a race to the bottom on political gerrymandering. I don't like gerrymandering at all. I'm appalled that this Supreme Court blessed it as something that is perfectly fine to do. And what you've seen since then is just the worst gerrymandering in modern history, perhaps ever. And now even racial gerrymandering is underway throughout the South. So my hope is that voters across the political spectrum will be disgusted by this, and that it will perhaps set the stage for nationwide redistricting reform so that we can just end the entire scourge of political gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering once and for all.
We have only a minute left, but there's one argument that says exactly what you just said. It's time for us to all come together and get something in place. It was every 10 years, right? The other part of it is we're in the cycle now, and it's not going to end. We are on the hamster wheel, and the hamsters aren't going anywhere. What do you think realistically is going to happen here, Congressman?
I think both those arguments are true in this moment. Certainly, Democrats cannot unilaterally disarm, given this race to the bottom that Trump has initiated. But we've got to look at the horizon and what is sustainable for this democracy. And you can't just have these cycles of gerrymandering and, the worst possible abuses of the political system. We've got to reset this thing. And my hope is that we can do that under a Democratic Congress in the near future.
Congressman Jared Huffman, thank you. It's good to see you.
We got some more serious business to discuss. Tomorrow, the president has called a cabinet meeting to discuss foreign policy updates, among other things. And there are several updates tonight in the Middle East. Earlier today, Iran was threatening retaliation for what the U.S. called self-defensive strikes that happened yesterday. The U.S. spokesperson said targets included missile launch sites and Iranian boats attempting to place mines. And that Central Command continues to defend our forces while using restraint during the ongoing ceasefire. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said it could take a few more days to negotiate a peace deal, but that's just after saying over the weekend that progress had already been made. Watch this.
We have what I think is a pretty solid thing on the table in terms of their ability to open up the straits, get the straits open, enter into a very real, significant, time-limited negotiation on the nuclear matters, and hopefully we can pull it off. We're either going to have a good agreement or we're going to have to deal with it another way. We'd prefer to have a good agreement.
But Iran responded and said the deal is not imminent. Back with us tonight, Jeff Mason, White House and Washington correspondent for Bloomberg News, and Susan Glasser, staff writer for The New Yorker. Okay, Jeff, like for real, where do negotiations stand? And help us clear up what has actually been proposed.
It's a little bit like a groundhog situation, a Groundhog Day situation, Steph. We've seen so many times already where the president has said we're close. The administration has said we're close. Iran has come back and said we're not that close. The president, as you rightly reported on Saturday, indicated that a deal was imminent, and he said that details were going to be shared shortly. And then the next day said that he was waiting for a good deal. So we know some parameters of the deal that have been outlined. But it is hard to gauge how close they actually are, and it is hard to see where it goes from here, considering the fact that you had these U.S. strikes yesterday and with Iran's threat of retaliation.
Susan, we keep hearing these veiled threats from both Marco Rubio and President Trump, but the New York Times reports that the president's pressure campaign has had little effect on Iran's terms for a peace deal. Is he going to accept that he doesn't have the leverage that he thinks he does?
I mean, look, is the sun going to come up tomorrow? I don't know. It's been raining a lot, right? So. I mean, let's be clear, right, that Donald Trump is shredding over the course of this last month, what remains of America's international credibility. There's this sort of aspect of every day claiming that a deal with Iran is, hours away, minutes away, days away, and it doesn't happen. It's actually been more than a month of the ceasefire being extended without any meaningful prospects for a deal. And the deal that they're talking about, by the way, would largely be an agreement to, on what terms is unclear, reopen the strait while agreeing only to talk about in the future resolving the nuclear issue that Trump claimed was the reason that he went to war in the first place. So it's basically right now, as I understand it, they're talking about whether in the next phase they could talk about an agreement on the future of the Iranian nuclear arms program. So, it's not much of a deal. And even that they haven't been able to achieve, first of all. And then I think it's so important to underscore, why does Trump keep doing this? Because it works. Because people can't believe that the president of the United States is lying to them, that he's not telling the truth, that the deal is not going to happen in the next few hours. I mean, I've seen perfectly credible, not naive people again and again and again fall into the trap over the last couple months of thinking, okay, well, maybe Trump is exaggerating, but surely the deal is, hours or days away from happening. The markets have responded as if they believe Trump has credibility and again been caught out by it. And I think we have to say that Trump has this playbook because it, to a certain extent, works, or at least buys him time.
Okay, but here's the thing. It works as it relates to the market. The market believes it, investors believe it, and the market keeps going up. But let's look at the reality of things. As far as we know, the Iranian regime is still intact. The country seems more emboldened over its control of the Strait of Hormuz than ever. Iran has denied agreeing at all to give up their enriched uranium. And meanwhile, here, the cost of living has gone up. The global economy is strained. We could face all sorts of shortages in the weeks and months to come. And you cannot deny that America's reputation is damaged. What did we get out of this, Jeff, besides the fact that when Donald Trump does this dance, does this shuffle, the market says, we believe you. Yay, keep going. But in reality, what has it gotten us? Besides further in the hole when it comes to debt and deficits.
And I would add to that the question that you just asked me is the question that some Republicans are asking of the president as well, and that is politically perilous for him. And you have senators such as Senator Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, worried that President Trump is going to get out of this war now too quickly, and may perhaps ruin the purposes or not achieve the purposes that they wanted and Hawks wanted him to achieve by going in the first place. And the political problem with that is he's facing sort of pressure from both sides. He's got that pressure that I just identified, and then he's got the pressure that you were referring to, which is the economic consequences that the United States is already facing and will continue to face as a result of this war. Primarily the increase in prices and specifically the increase in gasoline prices, which of course are a political albatross for Republicans and for the president going into the midterms in November.
Despite that, to Jeff's point, you are seeing some pushback from the likes of Ted Cruz, from the likes of Roger Wicker, and the fact that Lindsey Graham, who right now could be considered president of the Donald Trump fan club, the fact that they're pushing back in certain terms, what does that tell you, Susan?
Now, look, remember, the U.S. started this war along with its partner Israel in the region. The Israelis have been very concerned that Trump has basically sort of gone on his own in these talks with Iran. They have been concerned that Trump is cutting off the war while enabling Iran to retain much of its ballistic missile capability, in addition to its possibility of resurrecting its nuclear program. Both of those are considered to be very serious, if not potentially existential threats by Israel. So one aspect of this is you see some of Israel's strongest supporters here in Washington speaking out very loudly, pushing back as the gap has widened between what Trump's interests seem to be and what Israel's interests seem to be. So that's one aspect of it. I think there's also, to a certain extent, you can ignore reality for only so long. And part of it is the reality that this is a major embarrassment for the Trump administration. And you see some of his very strong, very vocal supporters understanding that if you end the war with the Iranian regime intact, with the global economy having been disrupted, and with Iran now understanding that it can weaponize the Strait of Hormuz practically at will, and that it's a potential source of billions of dollars of revenue going forward, that's not going to be considered a victory, even in the la-la fantasy land in which Donald Trump operates on social media. And so I think some of it is simply Republicans saying, hey, wait a minute here, this isn't working out too well for us.
All right, well, let's stick with Israel, because at the same time, the president is now pushing Saudi Arabia and Qatar to recognize Israel, along with several other countries in the region. He wants them to join the Abraham Accords. What is the thinking behind this? When we are so far away from the finish line, a peace deal, any sort of compromise on several other very complex agreements, why put this on the table now, Jeff?
It's a couple things. First thing that comes to mind to me is legacy, which is an issue or a theme that is absolutely defining President Trump's second term. You see that at a local level. You see that in terms of the ballroom, in terms of the construction projects that he's doing here in Washington. And you see that on a policy level with regard to Iran. He often will say this is something that previous presidents should have done. Now he's wanting to be able to show that he achieved a goal in Iran and in the Middle East that other presidents were not able to do. And that includes the Abraham Accords. It was interesting to see his language about that in his social media post. He said he wanted other countries mandatorily to join the Abraham Accords. I'm not sure that the use of mandatory as an adverb in that sense is going to actually have any kind of effect on countries that are deeply concerned about what's going on and aren't exactly lining up to sign them. That doesn't mean that it's not an approach or an effort that the president and his people are going to continue to push. It's one of the things that I think his foreign policy advisors are especially proud of from the first term and no doubt would like to extend during the second term. But the timing right now of trying to throw that all together when they don't have an Iran peace deal yet and when they continue to sort of push and pull and try to figure out where that is, it's hard to imagine that ultimate legacy driving goal getting accomplished.